If you're constantly changing, you can't start building on that
There's nothing to build on.
On that consistent identity and that consistent understanding, because you don't have a consistent understanding. Right. You're constantly changing paradigms.
Yeah.
And you don't even realize it.
There's a reason why human societies often rely on rules instead of principles. The only rule we have in our household is have fun, but then you have to do a lot of thinking about what is fun. It's not fun in the moment to brush your teeth, but it's also not going to be fun when a year later you have to go to the dentist and all your teeth are falling out because you never brush your teeth. That's much harder in terms of brain power than having a rule, brush your teeth twice a day.
A piece of advice that I've heard a lot of people give is like compartment your life. Basically, you know, keep your colleagues, you know, don't be super good friends with your colleagues, or like keep your friends away from your work, and then keep your family away from your work and your friends, and then, you know, basically just don't mix things, because then it gets all confusing and muddy, which, you know, I can see how that makes sense. And it does make things a lot more simple, but I think it has caused some problems and confusion because it doesn't actually feel very natural. Right. Like when you think about how we evolved, like we didn't have different places where we worked and we had our friends and we had our family. So why do we feel the need to do this now? And like, why does it feel so confusing when you start trying to mix these groups? Yeah. And also like, why, you know, what are some of the problems that can come from that? Right.
Well, I think that part of it is that it's really hard to try to have an integrated sense of identity when you have all these different environments that expect different things from you. Yeah. Right. Because you have a boss at work that expects things from you. You have a family at home that expects things from you. And there's certain parts of that environment that make it, there's different sorts of like paths of least resistance in each of these environments, what feels natural in each of these environments. Right. Right. Yeah. And I think that part of it is that it can be really hard to try to act consistently in all these different environments. And so the easy solution might be, oh, I don't need to act consistently. I'm compartmentalizing these different sides of myself, these like different parts of my life.
I act like this person at work. I act like the person who follows instructions. Right. And I just, I do what I'm told. And then maybe with my friends, I'm like the fun version of myself. Right. And then this is not just with adults. I think it's with a huge majority of people.
Oh yeah, I mean that's how I felt, 5 years ago when I was in public school. I was a different person at school than I was at home. I was a different person then, like at school and at home, than at Taekwondo, and it was just like it was just different sides of myself, and I could feel that. That was something that I was thinking about at 8 years old. I was like, I feel like I'm different people with even at school with different friend groups, and I didn't know how to deal with that.
Obviously, your friends are gonna expect different things than your parents. Right. Like, with your friends, it's all about have fun and do the work to not get in trouble. And then at home we were talking about philosophy, when you were 8 and I was 5, we were talking a lot about these things.
Well, I think that part of this is kind of the problem of how do you have an integrated sense of identity in this sort of environment that allows you to try to be a consistent person, because I think that it is really damaging to act like different people in different aspects of your life, which relates to our podcast when we're talking about honesty and memory. It's like, how are you supposed to try to have a consistent narrative in your life when you're acting like a bunch of different people? And I think that part of the difficulty there is we talk a lot about building shared understanding in our relationships and how that's really important, right? And I think that has to come from, I am a human being and I have a certain understanding of myself, and I'm connecting with this other human being that has a certain understanding of themselves, and then we're building a kind of a shared, collective, like high level understanding that encompasses that, right? But in order for that to happen, one, you need to have some kind of semi-consistent narrative as to who you are, and then the other person does too. And that's something that I've seen is actually pretty rare to come across.
Because and people don't actually like see sometimes how different
Right.
it can be, and that's how you can actually get into these really sticky spots where
Right.
it's like, you know, maybe you're at the grocery store, and then like one friend comes over, and then you're with a different friend from a
Right.
different friend group,
Right.
and you're like, which person do I act like now?
Right.
And then that breaks the trust between both of them
Right.
sometimes,
Right.
because it's like, who on earth did I like just become? You
Right.
know?
And it's like, and it's kind of like a fake trust, because it's like a fake part of you in the sense that it's not the whole you
Yeah.
with this other person, right? And so you're building trust with them
as
as
supposed to build super deep relationships of
Yeah.
like, I understand this person. Of
Right.
course, that's something, you know, we have because we spend a ton of time together, and we don't exactly like, you know, we do a lot of things together, so it's not like, you know, I just have a separate part of my life where I'm completely
well, and
different
also I
person.
think part of it is that we've had the opportunity to build a really deep integrated sense of self, and I think that that's something that is really important and goes deeper than just like, oh, I'm acting differently with these different people, but what's actually going on there on a mental level. Because one, it makes sense that you're going to try to resonate with the people around you, you're going to try to like fit in, right? That's kind of the colloquial term is fitting in, but
and it's not always like, you know, it's not, it doesn't always, it happens no matter what at like a certain subconscious level.
that's your default mode of operating.
The default mode of like, it doesn't feel forced. You're just gonna, you know, and it can happen at small levels that are not like completely changing your identity too.
Right.
You know, it's like if you're in a new place, and you know, you recognize that it's a bit, you know, cleaner than you're used to, and you know, there's a bunch of fancy stuff around, like maybe you're at a museum, you're probably not gonna like start being all loud and disruptive and like, you know, make
well,
a
people
big
also
mess.
talk about how they might have like a different personality when they speak in a different language, right? And there's all these different things that make it so that you will be acting differently. But I think in order for you to even try to build an integrated sense of self, you need to have some sort of more clear, intentional understanding of what are the axioms of your identity. You know, Jordan Peterson talks about how you need to have certain like axioms to build an understanding of the world. And people all have certain axioms, but they're generally not chosen intentionally. And generally, people don't have a clear understanding of what their axioms are, right? Because they're built through a lot of experience, and a lot of it, you know, especially because obviously as a kid, you're not going to be thinking about those things intentionally, and they're going to often be conditioned by your environment and the people around you.
Well, yeah,
and then you're building on that.
They're always going to be when you're a kid.
Yeah, and then you're building on that as an adult, but then there is really no mechanism to kind of alert you of the fact like, hey, you have axioms and they were kind of just conditioned into you, and maybe you need to rethink what they are because maybe they're not all that great. You know, it's like there's nothing prompting that in your life generally.
Most of the time.
Yeah, and I think that makes it really, really hard to try to build some kind of integrated sense of self that allows you to even see your own inconsistencies, right? Because you have these ways of operating around different people, but unless you have some kind of grounding ethos and understanding and principles to kind of evaluate that, how are you supposed to even see your own inconsistency? And hey, over here I'm acting this way, and over here I'm acting a different way, and to evaluate whether or not that's good, whether or not that's bad, right? You kind of need to have a higher level of understanding in order to make that evaluation
and like see it from a third person sort of view. But what if that third person is just another version of yourself?
Right,
like
exactly.
We've met people where it's like when they're in their, you know, intellectual, you know, analyzing mode, where they're being smart mode, where they're basically being like, oh, I look for friends that are, you know, I look for friends that are consistent and are not changing around, but then, you know, put them in a different environment and they just change.
And then they're changing themselves, right?
And then they're like, if you're in the same environment at them, and then they change, and then they're acting different towards you, and like, okay, what happened here?
Right. Yeah, and I think that that's part of what can be so difficult about building some kind of shared understanding is that, as you're saying, like maybe you're evaluating yourself, but it's just from from another perspective of yourself.
Yeah.
What actually allows you to have a through line? It is some kind of principle basis of understanding. The problem with a principle basis of understanding is that it requires a lot of general intelligence in order to be able to apply that. The problem, there's a reason why human societies often rely on rules instead of principles, right? Like in our household, we always had like the principles of freedom, kindness, and service to others, or we also like to say that the only rule we have in our household is have fun. But then you have to do a lot of thinking about what is fun, right?
Yeah.
And we always did that kind of meta-analysis of like, hey, it's not fun in the moment to brush your teeth, but it's also not going to be fun when a year later you have to go to the dentist and all your teeth are falling out because you never brush your teeth, right?
Yeah.
And
I actually just got my first cavity like a few weeks ago.
It's not fun.
And it was not fun getting it filled, and they put this giant thing, and I was like, bleh,
but
for half an hour.
Yeah,
it was not fun.
And that requires, one, thinking about the future. That requires being intentional about your actions. That requires, taking a step back and talking with other people. Is this good? Is this bad? How do we think about this? Right?
Yeah.
And that's much harder in terms of brain power than having a rule, brush your teeth twice a day, right? Which is why oftentimes we have explicit rules that explain those things instead of principles.
Yeah, that's where you get sometimes like with families where like
you have
one
a
of
million
my friends,
rules.
you have a million rules. You can't keep track of
Yeah.
them all. They're not written down. It's like, don't jump on the furniture.
Yeah.
But sometimes you can stand on the furniture to put something up.
Right.
Like, don't open the door only if we know the person.
Have
But
all these exceptions.
only if we really know the person, and like just check with us first. Don't open the door.
Stranger danger, unless they're the mailman because they're giving you mail,
Yeah.
It's like, so then you have all these exceptions. It's like, how are you supposed to be a consistent person when all you're focused on is constraints instead of what is the principle behind my actions, right? And then all you're doing is that you have a certain constraint, and then it's really hard to have meaningful, intentional interactions if all you're thinking about is, oh, I'm just going to do whatever I can within this environment versus what do I want out of this environment?
Yeah.
Who am I in this environment, right? And I think that makes it really, really hard to try to get to know somebody, because then if what they're doing is they're just kind of molding to their environment, but there's no principle basis of who they are, then you can resonate with somebody. You can have a great interaction. You can think, oh yeah, we're talking about this thing. And then what happens is then that just seems like a moment within a series of moments in their life. It isn't something where then you teach them about something about yourself, and then that actually becomes integrated into an understanding that then will influence their behavior.
If you're constantly changing, you can't start building on that.
Right.
On that
There's nothing to build on.
On that consistent identity and that consistent understanding, because you don't have a consistent understanding.
Right. Yeah.
You're constantly changing paradigms.
Yeah.
And you don't even realize it.
Right.
Because it's your paradigm. It's the way you're viewing the world. Mm-hmm. And so you can't view the way you're viewing the world. It's kind of hard to do that, obviously. So
right.
You're changing paradigms.
Mm-hmm.
And then so you're switching your understanding.
Yeah.
So you can't build on your understanding.
Yeah.
And I think what you want to do is like, well, people might be like, well, this is just what we have to do, because like, what else are we going to do? But you can still build that consistent understanding and mold a little bit while still having that consistent base.
But that has to come intentionally, because it has to come from more of a meta-analysis, conscious perspective of, who do I want to be? What do I value? And then you have to be intentional about looking back on your actions and thinking, does this align with my understanding of who I want to be, right? Is this something where, like when I said that thing, is that really representative of who I am and my values, right? And to try to have that sort of understanding requires a lot of intentional thought and reflection, right?
Yeah, and documenting.
Yeah, and documenting and all those sorts of things that we also talked about in the Honesty and Memory podcast, because it's like part of this is in order for you to remember things, you want to have a consistent basis of yourself. And in order to build shared understanding, you need to have some level of understanding of yourself, right? And I think that, one example is that we did a podcast on basically 8 reasons why our relationships are falling apart and communities are falling apart in the digital age. And this first started where I just kind of free flow. I just like wrote down these 8 points in like 30 minutes because I was like, oh my God. It was like all
that.
Because I had this burst of inspiration.
Breakthroughs.
Yeah. So I had this burst of inspiration. I wrote this out and I sent it to one of my friends. I was like, this was something where I felt like it was such a good encapsulation of the things I was struggling with in terms of relationship.
Yeah,
and it's relevant to her because she's my friend and she's one of my relationships,
and this
right?
friend, she's in public school. She's actually really cool.
Yeah.
But, she's in this environment every day where probably her understanding of essays is more like homework.
Well, she is a very intellectual person. She really likes talking about ideas, but it also is hard to then, a lot of people I think will go into what you call like the intellectual mode and they'll think about ideas and then they don't have a way of understanding the emotional implications.
Yeah.
Right. And so then it just becomes this, this idea is so interesting. We had a conversation and then it's like, okay, but then
you're not actually
what's the impact, right? So she responded and she was just kind of like, oh, you should include some scientific references, those sorts of things. And I'm like, yeah, I'm just trying to share this idea with you.
Yeah.
And she was like, oh yeah, that's interesting. Thanks for sharing. But I was just thinking about like what it would require for her to truly internalize what I had sent in a way that
in terms is of like, oh my God, my relationships, is this why my relationships?
Well, in terms of her own understanding of her relationships, also her understanding of our relationship and who I am in terms of this is what I'm thinking about in terms of relationships, right? That's what I'm expressing to her. And this is what I want. And this is what I'm striving for. And this is the problems that I see, right? That should, if you think about it, have a lot of implication as to like, in terms of emotional gravity, not just intellectual interest around here's something that I would like to express,
you're
right?
looking at it in the right way. That's the thing. People can look at it in so many different ways, and then it can be useful in one way and not so much in another.
Yeah. And I think that what's so difficult about this problem is that I think for young people, they don't know who they are yet. Right. And so it's very easy for them to be very adaptive to different situations. And so then they don't really have a very strong sense of self. Mm-hmm. That's something that we've struggled with as young people, trying to connect with other young people is like, oh, these kids don't know who they are. And it's, which is expected. And it's
I've struggled that with like that myself is like, I think that, is something that it's hard to stop working on that, because you're constantly learning and you're constantly changing. Yeah. And then some things might fit together and other things might be like, okay, wait a minute, and that's something we've both worked on and
but it's more
hard.
like, and it definitely is. And it shouldn't be expected that young people would have an understanding of who they are. But I think what we should try to help young people put into place is at least a learning mechanism so they can start learning who they are, instead of just having a series of disconnected experiences that they have no way of evaluating to try to start to build some kind of consistent understanding and some, principle-based understanding of who they are and what they're doing, right? Because otherwise, as a young person, you're having all these experiences, but you don't have a basis of actually even putting that to use, right? And so there's kind of a twofold problem, which is one, okay, you have all these young people who don't know who they are, and they also don't know how to discover who they are, right? And so obviously for us, we're like, oh, okay, this is kind of hard in terms of how do you actually build a meaningful relationship out of that, right? And then, which is, you can still have fun with these people. It can still be very enjoyable. You can still do some cool things with them, but it's still like, do you feel like you're actually building something of, I'm getting to know this person better, they're getting to know me better, and we're making progress on that, right? That's the main thing that I felt like I've been completely lacking is progress, because I'll have a moment of resonance, right? And then it's like the next time we meet up, there's no building on that. It's just like we're back to ground zero of, okay, like we're going to do this other thing now, right? And then, so you have this problem with a lot of young people, right? And then you have the problem with older people who generally, they know exactly who they are and it's a very fixed understanding, and it's not a principle-based understanding, right? Generally, then after, if you're coming from a basis of being a young person, which these old people used to be, right, is a young person who didn't necessarily have a principle-based understanding of how to build themselves, then you kind of have a very simplified construct of this is who I am, and then it becomes very rigid, because the thing about a principle-based understanding is that you can continuously adapt how that principle-based understanding should be applied, right? If you have an understanding of, hey, I want to, be trustworthy to the people around me, right? Maybe that's a goal that you have. Then you can continuously build on your understanding of how to do that most effectively, right?
Versus other rules, like with opening the door or something, like I wanna be safe,
right?
Which is one thing,
right,
and
right.
If they're versus
stranger danger, right?
versus this person we have a rule, and this person we have a rule, and this person we have a rule. What if a person comes in you didn't create a rule for?
Yeah. And that's often what you see with a lot of adults, if they don't have a principle-based understanding, is that it's kind of like a giant mess of rules that are often are riddled with inconsistencies and then are not flexible to change, right? And that's something where it's like, okay, obviously it's hard to build shared understanding with someone like that, because oftentimes what then those adults are seeking is who has the exact same complicated, inconsistent mess of rules that I can then feel like we can connect and have the exact same understanding.
And obviously,
right? And
you're never gonna find someone like that.
Yeah, exactly. Which is why then it's like, oh, nobody understands me. It's like, you don't understand yourself, so how can they? Right?
So either you have one person just adapting to the other person and just changing because of that, which you see a lot of people do. I watched a video, and it was basically a lady talking about her story, and she was like, I had this identity crisis when I was 16 or something, because I realized everything about myself were just things I had changed to fit other people's narratives.
Right.
My favorite color wasn't even blue, but I painted my walls blue because my friend said her favorite color was blue.
Yeah, and I think that the problem here is that we don't have an environment and some kind of mechanism that allows us to build a good understanding of ourselves, and then therefore it makes it impossible to build a shared understanding with other people, which is really, really dangerous, because then you're just there in your own head, with this complicated, inconsistent, blurry understanding of who you are, and then you're trying to navigate the world that's extremely complicated, full of dangerous things. It's like, yeah, of course we're going through a mental health epidemic, and of course people are feeling so confused about how to navigate this environment, right? But I think that part of what we can really try to do is think about is to help people be in a state where they can start to think about themselves from this more meta perspective, which is necessary to build a principle-based understanding of yourself that is deeper than just your experiences and adapting to the people around you. And I think that we're not giving that space for kids, because it's like you're in school and it's like, you just have a bunch of people a bunch of kids who don't know who they are judging each other, and of course you're just gonna be like, oh, how do I just not get bullied and mold myself to whatever is needed to this situation. And there's no level of patience or space or feeling of safety to even start that process of reflection, right? And then oftentimes, if you have parents who don't have that principle-based understanding, then they're probably just going to be imposing their rules on you instead of actually helping you engage in that critical thought process, right? And I think that it's just really important for us to think about, how do we give young people the opportunity opportunity to think about themselves, because I think that that's so important in today's world, where in order for you to survive, you need to at the very least know who you are, right? And then hopefully find other people who can also be curious enough and have the clarity and awareness to try to discover who you are too, right? And it's like, yeah, of course we don't feel understood, you can't if you don't understand yourself. But I think that we can get there. It's something that I think we're seeing more and more of the problems that are leading to this kind of, environment and state that we're in. But the thing is that we all want understanding. We all want to understand ourselves, and we're all humans too. So there's overlap in terms of how we can help each other and help understand each other too.